Welcome. It's Tuesday, April 4th, 6:30 p.m., and this is a special council meeting which has been convened in order to conduct a council workshop at the request of council on the home energy retrofit program. And Madam Clerk, do we have any regrets? I'm not aware of any myself. Oh, Councillor Longo has regrets. He asked me to pass that along.
And Councillor Noel will be joining us shortly.
All right. Council, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, thank you, everyone. That brings us to our discussion report, the sole item for this meeting. And the leadoff is by Rob Lister, the President and CEO of Oakville Enterprises. We have staff on hand as well, Rija Rasool and Siraj Maan and Julie Clark, and they'll be able to assist us as necessary during the meeting. Mr. Lister, we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, councillors. It's great to be here. Different topic tonight. Yeah. So, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the home energy retrofit program to explore the path forward for the town of Oakville. The town of Oakville's community energy strategy is based on 4 theme areas or key strategies. One of the 4 strategies is to increase the efficiency of existing homes. This evening, I'm going to provide an updated context of the opportunities, and then Rija Rasool and Chris Terrell will take you through a presentation on the program and the next steps. Chris Terrell has been retained by OEC to assist with the home energy retrofit project. Chris has many decades of senior leadership at City of Mississauga, at Ontario Hydro and Toronto Hydro, including Chief Conservation Officer. He was also co-chair of the Energy Ministry's Conservation First Framework that was responsible for the development, implementation, and management of the 6-year, $2 billion project for a framework in Ontario from 2015 to 2020. So he comes with a wealth of experience in the area of energy conservation. Chris now operates an energy and environmental consulting business where he continues to be actively involved in conservation through his work with customers, government agencies, utilities, and associations. Chris is recognized as a leading expert in energy conservation and customer experience management, and I'm very pleased to have him working with us. The community energy strategy is ambitious and necessary for Oakville to achieve its long-range climate action goals. The home energy retrofit program has the potential to be a material contributor to the necessary outcomes. Many municipalities in Ontario and Canada have taken on the climate change challenge and adopted a similar community energy strategy and are now working through the opportunities and the challenges of meeting these important carbon reduction targets. An overarching challenge is that all levels of government are faced with the very ambitious greenhouse gas reduction targets, very short time frames, and little or no budget. Working together and collaborating on solutions and opportunities to overcome the challenges has never been as important. It will require a level of cross-industry and business collaboration that has never been seen before. OEC is committed to working closely with the town and other stakeholders on this project and other energy projects to reduce carbon, like the district energy and the geo-exchange initiatives that we are pursuing. As for the home energy retrofit study, I want to acknowledge the good work that has been done by the consultant Garforth International, OEC, and town staff, with Rija Rasool being a driving force. As part of the context this evening, I'll summarize some of the background. In 2018, the Community Energy Strategy was adopted by Council. The strategy outlined a home energy retrofit program approach, and the next steps were to evaluate the approach and the opportunity through a feasibility study. The feasibility study was based on key assumptions to analyze the technical potential on a best-case scenario basis of a program to support the community energy strategy goals. Technical potential analysis is typically the first step in evaluating an opportunity of this nature. Stress testing the approach follows by factoring in societal and market-related barriers like realistic adoption rates, cost-effective measures, anticipated consumer behavior, and technical and logistical feasibilities. The results of the analysis provide a view of the achievable potential. Since the 2018-2019 timeframe, the societal and market barriers have become more prominent, and the view of the achievable potential has softened. Stress testing the key assumptions has revealed unfavorable program economics, much lower customer uptake, higher risk, and much lower contributions to the community energy strategy goals. A lot has changed since the strategy was adopted, and for the next steps, we need to identify, understand, and quickly adapt to the changing landscape by adjusting our path forward. Regia will elaborate on one of the most significant gaps, homeowner education and awareness, and the concept of an energy coach as a service. Chris will speak about leveraging in-market incentive programs and services, ones that already exist, which provide a way to accelerate the program. And partnering with other well-recognized organizations is a very good approach for the town. There are several encouraging opportunities to explore, and Regia and Chris will now present the workshop materials followed by questions and discussion. So thank you very much, and Regia.
Thanks, Rob. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. Next slide, please. My name is Rija Rasool, and I'm the Senior Climate Officer with the town, leading the Community Energy Strategy portfolio and associated projects. I'll start by providing some background and context on the program as a whole and why we're here today. I'll then turn it over to Chris, who will give an overview of the feasibility study business case report and the work completed as a part of that study. Then I'll talk a bit about the changing landscape that Rob just touched on and experience and lessons learned from existing or in-market municipal programs. And then we'll get into the proposed path forward, outline some recommendations and next steps, and end off with Q&A. Next slide. In 2020, Council approved Oakville's first community energy strategy, which established these three broad 2041 goals. The strategy was presented by the Oakville Energy Task Force, and in addition to these goals, it identified 12 priority projects that were classified within 4 strategic directions or key theme areas. Next slide. One of those strategic directions is home and building efficiency or homes and buildings. And 2 of the 3 objectives within this strategic direction revolve specifically around existing homes and buildings in Oakville. The specific objective for existing homes is written on the slide, and the affiliated target is to achieve a 30% energy efficiency in this sector by retrofitting 80% of existing homes. The 2 priority projects affiliated with this objective and target are also indicated on the slide. The first one, to complete a business case to establish a company to deliver energy retrofits for homes and buildings, was completed through the work with Garforth International in 2022. And priority project 1.2 is really dependent on the outcomes of that study, and ultimately this approach for the next step is what we're here for today. I'm going to turn it over to Chris now to get into the feasibility study work.
Thank you, Regia. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to come and speak tonight. So I just want to start by saying the opportunity so my career, as Rob's pointed out, is I've been involved in conservation for a long time. And I've had the opportunity to basically make it part of my job for 4 decades, if you will. And one of the most valuable parts of having this opportunity is actually work with municipalities and utilities across the province, and in fact, Canada, for that matter. So I appreciate some of the challenges that the council face, the need to show action on many of these initiatives, and the importance of these actions to demonstrate, and make some progress on climate change and the issues that are surrounding that. So what I want to do is sort of outline the study concept, the study approach, and work through answering really 1.1 and 1.2 and how we got to where we were, and what can we do to map out a path forward. So that's my job today or tonight, and hopefully there's time. There will be time for questions and discussion afterwards. We took 1.1 and 1.2 as sort of the direction, and then ultimately we had to flesh out the answers to those questions. We ultimately had to design a scope of work that a consultant could work through and help us understand the opportunity and work through some of the program challenges and risks and barriers and what opportunities we could do to overcome them. That's typically what you do in a feasibility study, as you know. So we mined out of the community energy strategy, what were the key assumptions that shaped the program model? And those were really important to shaping sort of the framing goals and things that we needed to understand and flesh out as part of the study. I'll just highlight a couple because I don't want to go through all of them, but the model assumed that there was going to be a governance structure that there was going to be this municipal services corporation entity that essentially would be the delivery agent. They would be the management company that ultimately contracted with suppliers and service providers in the local community to provide retrofits to the constituents. The target was always to serve the maximum value to contribute to the CES goals. So 80% was chosen. That is essentially what you would define as a technical potential, the best case scenario to achieve the maximum penetration, the maximum value of GHG or greenhouse gas reduction applying or using one of these types of programs. There was a host of measures, energy retrofit measures that we looked at, and it was a flood of data from energy from the utilities, both natural gas and electricity and water, and by house. We actually had energy profiles of all the houses and could understand the energy use patterns and understood what age of those homes, what type of home, what size, those types of things all fed into the model. There was an idea around, it was one of the key assumptions, that the pricing strategy, this is really key to the success of the performance of the model. The pricing strategy assumed that the entity could buy products and services at an economy of scale that would essentially lower the overall price to the consumer. So that could be parts of that could be passed on to the consumer, but could also provide headroom for margin to operate the entity and perhaps even provide a dividend to the town at the end of the project. So those were fed into the model. And then financing was essentially established a couple of opportunities or approaches. One was consumers would pay it by themselves or go through their own credit facilities, or they would apply through a local improvement charge that ultimately there was an assumption that the town would underwrite or have not underwrite, but have a way of collecting the payments through the tax bill. The finance companies that would see that as a value, lower risk, and ultimately would attract lower interest rates, which then would attract greater penetration of consumers. And last but not least, this was all underscored by a value proposition to the consumer, where the savings had to be greater than the costs that they would be paying through the local improvement charge or their own credit facility payment process. So all of those assumptions led into a scope of work, and rather than go through the detail, I'm basically suggesting that data, we established a baseline. We took all that data, fed it into a model, and we actually were able to map out what consumers use in what type of home and what measures would be applicable and what savings would be associated with that. It's it's a very technical process of doing that, and it's a lot of data. But that's that's what you will find in the report, and ultimately that led to understanding what the opportunity was in the aggregate of a program over term, but also right down to the customer's value proposition. Could we answer that? This idea of the entity was also flushed out as part of the scope, and we learned, the roles and responsibilities or the ideas around the entity and the risks associated with that, or the opportunities that came with that. We stakeholdered a lot of this data, this information output, in tranches to the community, and we engaged through stakeholder processes in customer surveys, focus groups. We had direct meetings with contractors, investors, other stakeholders, including the town staff and different departments, as well as OEC, Enbridge. And a lot of that fed into what we needed to do to shape the model even better. The model was to, or the scope was to identify barriers and offer opportunities to overcome those, and a lot of those are in the conclusions of the report. So as Rob laid out, the idea, the normal process of this is you do a technical feasibility study, a technical potential study, and most programs modeling is done this way. You take a technical potential at the macro level, and you test to see if the model makes sense. Does it pass all of the financial, the customer, all the different goals and thresholds that you try to achieve? And if that's the case at a technical potential, then you stress test it to understand the achievable potential. And then you factor in all the different societal market barrier type issues that Rob described, which would lead you to the achievable potential. Typically, that fleshes out the best case scenario and the more realistic case scenario that you have to deal with. And then it's informative to figure out, do you have to adapt the model to make it that much better, knowing that this is likely what the market realities are. So next slide, please. I've kind of passed, yep, that's it. So this is really the outcome of the study. All of that data, all of those analyses fed into this, and I know some of the previous presentations you had brought you along through some of that discussion. So I just wanted to highlight some of these things are very informative and help you, again, identify the gaps and and discuss or present opportunities that perhaps you need to adapt your approach given some of the changes that have happened since even the model's been done. So at the highest level, when you look at the technical potential of this study, the best case scenario, it did actually provide benefits to the homeowner, contractor, investors. And in fact, when you got to the micro level, the customer level, one-on-one in different archetypes, the measures actually were provided greater savings than cost. So the value proposition is there, which is a good thing. So not all homes would be like that, but many of the archetypes that had older homes were definitely well-fitting in that category. The local improvement charge at the aggregate level, the program level, did actually mitigate some of the risks for the investor and had some merit. So, but at the same time, it was done just prior to sort of the escalation of interest rates and some of the financial pressures that are causing some of the investors to have concern these days. So you basically factoring those in, you have to pause and think about how that has to be, challenged or addressed. The study, through the stress testing, identified two major risks that are critical to the program. And Rob highlighted them. One was the penetration rate. If you don't get the penetration rates of something that's, a reasonable level, then the startup costs that you were assuming you were going to be able to pay for through the revenues that were going to be generated at this higher penetration level are not there. And so you end up with two substantial risks that causes, negative sustainability of the program. So let's talk about the stress testing. Stress testing, like I said, at 80% is typically the technical potential evaluation. At 50% and 80%, the model and the approach is economic. But when you get closer to the 5% penetration, which is very typical with residential programs that are in fact incented, they have incentives, and this one did not. That is a very attractive residential and very good successful program. the program was not economic. So the idea that we were discussing with the consultant is, okay, how do we overcome some of these challenges to make the program, viable and attractive to consumers? The conclusions, and I say key conclusions because there's 2 pages of conclusions or 3 pages of conclusions, and I summarized them here. But a lot of the other work that's been done is sort of supporting a narrative around them. But one of the key recommendations to improving on the 5% or the low penetration rate would be to supplement the value proposition with, incentives and try to attract or try to, tap into all available incentives and government grants and finance programs that are currently available or in the future. And so that was one of the mitigating opportunities that were discussed. A lot of things have changed. Next slide, please. Like I said, a lot of things have changed in a short time. One thing is pretty constant, though, and I'll just raise this from experience. Consumer behaviors has been a constant throughout my 4 decades of working in conservation. They're quite often motivated in one year and not motivated in other years to do retrofit investments. And it is an investment consumers make in their homes. They expect the savings will pay for the program or pay for the retrofit. And that's not an unreasonable investment. That's what everybody strives to do. But recent months, in recent years, and in a very short time, we've been faced with inflationary pressures and less available cash and people with energy poverty situations. In fact, we have customers that are struggling to pay their hydro bills. And that's not a good situation. So they don't have available cash to go around and pay for retrofits. And so you've got to think about how are we going to help those people? And how do we make that, how do we overcome that barrier in terms of that creates a negative or a much lower penetration issue. So, one thing is education and going through sort of that awareness of different programs that support the investments and those kind of things, which is always a gap in these types of programs. Financial environment, as everybody knows, and personally and in corporate world, rising interest rates are causing significant changes in how we view investments and what we do. But, we were designing and thinking about a local improvement charge that at best might be, prime plus 2 as an attractive interest rate for consumers to help them invest in conservation. When there's competing programs out there like the Green Homes program that is 0% for up to $40,000 for 10 years. And so you have to look at those programs and go, you can't compete with those. We need to leverage those as much as we possibly can. And so Regia is going to talk about that in a minute. There's a number of available programs that are current in market ready, and working quite well, that do exactly the same thing as what this idea was supposed to achieve, and that ultimately there's opportunities to partner with those host program sponsors. And I'll talk about those in a second, but there is a lot of push from all federal, provincial, and municipal, and large corporation looking to decarbonize and come up with programs that support investment in decarbonizing the entire infrastructure system. Technology is playing a big part. They're starting to play a big part, and it's really encouraging. Products are becoming available. There's early products that you would have not thought about, 5 years ago, are becoming very mainstream topic now. And I'll use one, hybrid air source heat pumps. I personally bought one 5 years ago in a new home. And, because of my background, it was generation 1 hybrid heat pump. Cold climate, it works down to about -5 degrees Celsius, and then my propane furnace kicks over. These now work to -20. And they're put on as part of a natural gas. So they basically are their primary heating system, and natural gas becomes a supplementary heating system. So these technologies are starting to play through the market, and the program needs to reflect these emerging technologies and how can they be integrated into the system to make value for all stakeholders. And then I want to stress that there's so many municipalities doing exactly the same thing as you, working through various pilot programs and different things, and there's been so many learnings and observations come out of that's instructional to municipalities and a lot of information sharing opportunities. So I'm going to turn it over to Risha to talk about those. I covered up her notes.
Next slide, please. Since Oakville initiated our business case feasibility study, a number of municipalities in Ontario and across Canada have launched and shared with us updates and lessons learned, as well as insights on challenges that they're facing through the delivery and implementation of their own standalone municipal retrofit programs. We've seen that the most significant gap and an area that needs further attention, and arguably where municipalities can have the most meaningful impact, even more so than the provision of loans to finance retrofits, is in the education, awareness, and specifically need for energy coach or advisory service space. Another significant observation is that standalone local improvement charge or LIC-based municipal programs are not sustainable for municipalities to run in the long term. There are significant limitations and challenges around the municipal ability to fund an LIC-based program in the long term, including concerns and risks around the municipal role and the question of whether a municipality should be acting as a bank, for example, as well as challenges around the municipal ability to secure and even use external or private financing to fund these programs. And I just did quickly want to note that the list of programs that you see on the slide this is not an exhaustive list. There are many other programs. These are just the ones that most recently we've been able to hear updates on. And I also wanted to point out that of this list, Durham Region and the London Hydro example are not LIC-based programs. The London Hydro one actually isn't even technically a retrofit program. This is a partnership that London Hydro had with the City of London and Enbridge, offering financial incentives to up to 100 homeowners in the City of London to an incentive to purchase a hybrid heat pump. And that pilot program is now complete, and it did meet its target objectives. And the Durham Region 1 is not an LIC-based program because it is a regional initiative, so the local improvement charge mechanism wasn't required. They ended up just partnering with local credit unions to provide the financing. And the most recently launched among this list is the City of Calgary, and I just wanted to highlight that it is also an LIC-based program in Calgary, administered through a nonprofit organization called Alberta Municipalities that's been around since 1905. And in the first few days of their launch, they did see an overwhelming response in pre-qualifying submissions. They had about 240, and those 240 submissions totaled to about $7 million worth of loans required for the retrofits that these 240 homes were seeking to implement. Their total program budget is about $15 million. So this is just to show the significant dollar value required to retrofit homes. Next slide, please. I'll turn it over to Chris again, just to highlight some of the recent consumer insights from the ISO survey.
Thank you. Thank you, Risha. So one of the important learnings that I've had over my career is to listen to the customer and understand their program needs. And what I found very useful in the last, this is as recent as December, the Independent Electricity System Operator conducted a survey across Ontario on their existing programs and what customers' needs were relative to the programs that they were offering. And these aren't actually new because these are always sort of the fundamental requirements that come out of customers all the time, but you have to pay attention very clearly to them. But they have some nuances that are interesting. First and foremost, customers hate start and stop of programs. They want some longevity. And so when they have to budget for retrofit upgrades, they're not modest upgrades. Quite often they're in tens of thousands of dollars. So they want to have certainty that there is a program that they can tap into, not this year, but perhaps next year when they do get their budget to them. So they have to have some continuity and longevity to the program that the host is offering or the sponsor's offering. The incentive has to be impactful. And I say this a bit of tongue-in-cheek, to be honest. We at Toronto Hydro and across the province designed some pretty significant programs, up to and including paying 100% of the installation, supply and install in a small business program, and we only got 50% penetration. And all they had to do was answer at the door or say yes or no. So even you pay, even if you go 100%, you still get something less than 100% penetration. So you have to figure out what is impactful, what is the level of incentive that gets the customer motivated, and that is what they're telling us: is make sure that it's not a modest incentive, but you don't have to go over the top. And that's part of a factoring or modeling tool that you have, or one of the things you have to do in these kind of achievable potential evaluations. One size does not fit all came loud and clear. These previous programs that we drafted were always kind of prescriptive and didn't always fit the customer's needs. And they say that they were telling us that we needed more flexibility in the programs to allow custom-based solutions, which is quite instructional. One of the underlying, and this has always been in survey results, is we need to enhance education and information and support. I will use a good example of this one. Toronto Hydro had the largest target in the province between 2015 and 2020. We targeted the commercial industrial customers, and we were providing 30 and 40% incentives for fairly significant projects. And so the value proposition was there. What we couldn't get is the application flow. So when we went back out to the consumer and researched this issue, what we found was they were confused. They didn't have the right information. The contractors weren't trained. There was various different gaps in the education, communication, and awareness and coaching advisory service. And so we put together what was called an application representative initiative, ARI, for example. We always had an acronym. And that we went from 100 applications a month to over 1,000, and we sustained over 1,000 for almost 5 years. We had 12,000 applications a year for these types of programs. So we proved that helping customers through the process of getting the information they need, getting the education, educating contractors and making sure they understood was invaluable to the process. One thing that came back that hasn't been in some of these customer surveys is that Dow is starting to value decarbonization. The idea of, well, what value does that bring to the table for consumers? And they want to quantify it. It's hard to quantify it these days, but we need to work on how we can quantify it to help them factor it into their value proposition. But they're showing interest, and that's a good thing. So we need to take that and help them through that process. Next slide, please. I only have a couple more, so I just wanted to highlight some of the in-market incentive programs and services. And there's a growing number of programs, and these are significant programs that the measures are all measures that you would normally have in retrofit programs, like the one you were contemplating or that we're contemplating in Oakville. Federal government, as I said, the Greenhouse program provides $5,000 grants and then interest-free loans up to $40,000 at 0%. Enbridge, their Home Energy Efficiency Rebate Plus program, provides up to $10,000 rebate for retrofits. This is insulation, window upgrades, air sealing, heating replacements, those kind of things. They also have what Regis is describing, this hybrid heat pump program, which is making its way. It's a pilot, and I believe the pilot's just ended a few weeks ago, but it did provide rebates up to $3,200, and these things are maturing in the market and becoming invaluable in terms of really good opportunity in terms of decarbonizing natural gas heating systems in the market. which is one of the largest obvious greenhouse gas reduction contributors in the residential market. Then there's pending programs like the Independent Electricity System Operator. They have conservation demand management programs, as you would, similar to what the LDCs or local distribution companies like Oakville Hydro were providing. They are now working with utilities to make them the delivery agent of post-2024 programs. And there's a really significant need in the supply of electricity. They have fairly large targets and fairly large budgets. So we're watching those and working with the ISO to work through what those programs are going to look like and how the LDCs will contribute. And then last but not least, this federal tax credit it's not pending, it has been announced. The problem is trying to find detail on it. It's so recent, just as of last week, and it provides up to 30% of tax credit for solar, winds, battery storage, and ground source heat pump applications. So these programs are significant. Again, they're the same. They've got all the same measures, and they're already in market. And there's no reason that we couldn't leverage these to take really strong action to intensify marketing activities in the local community. Next slide, please. So last but not least, what we have learned through the process of the study, it was quite informative. It worked through a lot of the detail and gave us the technical versus achievable, uncovered a lot of risks and opportunities. One of the things that did, a lot of the things that came out of it, that including the things that we've been researching through municipalities, is that customers' program needs are sort of first principles. Everything needs to be designed around that if you're going to get a program that's going to be successful. We talked about the sensitivity of technical versus achievable, and the reality is most programs in residential market, and always has been, is really challenging to get a program over 5%. That's just the reality of it, because there's so many, consumer influences. There's so many influences that change consumer behaviors that make this market a really challenging one. Education and awareness we've talked about, but again, underscore this opportunity to provide that service at a very low cost and work through sort of an energy coaching service. We talked about this collaboration with other municipalities. It's enlightening to watch a lot of the pilots being done and the information coming out. Technology is, there has to be, watch closely. We need to nurture some of this technology in its early infancy through to, success and larger penetration, but it has to be addressed very strategically. And I know utilities look at both sides and go, well, if you put too much in my system, it causes me pain and my rates go up because of it. And, it's a balancing act. So we have to very strategically work through the technology integration to help all stakeholders adapt to that. And then, again, there's this immediate opportunity to partner and leverage current in-market programs at relatively no risk to the town. And also tap into the incentive programs and finance programs that are available and promote them. And that sort of maps out, and those are sort of the key takeaways that have mapped out the path forward that Risha will outline now. Thank you.
Next slide, please. So taking into account these key takeaways, what this means for Oakville's path forward, we want to leverage the opportunity to partner with existing credible entities that are active in this space to promote and accelerate their both current and upcoming or future programs with the goal of advancing uptake in Oakville. Benefits of this type of approach include the opportunity to expedite Oakville's program implementation through the ability to quickly launch that communication, outreach, and education campaign or program, which would add immediate value and fill a gap in the space that we know exists. Like Chris said, there are minimal startup costs and risks to the town associated with that. It also helps avoid duplication of efforts and program competition that could impact potential uptake in an Oakville-only program. And it also aligns well with other ongoing efforts at the town that we're exploring both on our own as well as through other stakeholders and partners that I'll touch on in the next slide. So to summarize, this path forward is designed to overcome all of the barriers that we've heard about, and it aims to expedite in-market activities while reducing town risk and still contributing to community energy strategy goals. So the first step immediately that we can take is to establish and secure that partnership or collaboration agreement with a credible, well-recognized entity to intensify those current and future program activities, simultaneously working to develop that comprehensive homeowner education and awareness program, similar to something that could look like a one-stop shop type of resource for homeowners, where they'll be able to learn about the benefits of home energy retrofits and the different types of retrofits that they can consider. They'd also be able to understand the benefits of home energy audits and how to access one, as well as finding information on all of the existing incentive and rebate programs that Chris highlighted earlier, the differences between them and kind of how to navigate that space. This education program will feed into the development or opportunities to leverage a home energy coach or advisory service. As a starting point, we know that we can also work with building services at the town to leverage opportunities to advise on energy efficiency recommendations through their department and, for example, permitting requests that they receive. And we're also keeping in mind opportunities to engage other stakeholders like the contractor community in Oakville and Halton as a whole. For example, we collaborated with the City of Burlington and the town of Halton Hills at the end of last year, seeking funding through the federal government for a heat pump training initiative for contractors to accelerate and build capacity of the contractor community and to accelerate adoption of heat pump technology in Halton as a whole. And all of this will feed into a broader approach. We know that we need to reassess our larger approach and alternative mechanisms to achieve meaningful greenhouse gas emissions reductions in homes and buildings, so not just residential, but even commercial and industrial. And this work will all align with the planned CES update. If you recall, the CES is meant to be updated every 5 years. Since it was approved in 2020, the next update is due for 2025. Next slide. So in the next few months, the town and OEC will work to establish that partnership with the other entities. We've already begun to have conversations with Enbridge, for example, and this phase of work will also include determining alignment with and the potential role of Future Energy Oakville in a program like this. In Q2 of 2023, we'll also have that soft launch of the Communication and Outreach Awareness Program, and this will include exploring how we can leverage or deliver on an energy coach service working with our partners. And then this will all put us in a position to return to council by Q3 of 2023 with an implementation plan providing more detail on the full program. And pending council approval, we'd be in a position to launch that full education and awareness program by the end of Q4 of this year. And like I said, the CES update work will have begun by then, allowing us to align and coordinate with that planned update to tackle homes and buildings more broadly. And of course, that CES update will have its own work plan and detailed tasks and opportunities to engage with stakeholders and community members. This is just shown at a very high level for the purposes of this slide, but just to say that that update will feed into, or this program will feed into that update. To summarize our key next steps, next slide. Most immediately to initiate that soft launch of the Communication and Outreach Program in the next few months, and then to return to council with that detailed implementation plan in Q3. And next slide, that concludes the presentation, and I think Chris and I can take any questions.
Thank you very much. We have indications of questions from Councillor Elgar and Councillor Giddings, but before I turn to you, Council, would you like to hold your questions until you've heard the delegations, or would you like to go in two steps here? Perhaps you'd like to go in two steps and question the presenters now. Councillor Elgar.
I'm at your will, Mayor Burton. I just have a few questions, and I don't know whether it'll help to hear from the delegations first or not. I'm at your, whatever you want to do.
Well, let's see if any of this new information is resonating with our delegations, most of whom we're well acquainted with. So I thank you for your suggestion that we wait for, till we have everything on the table.
Okay.
Madam Clerk, Councillor Giddings, is that okay with you as well? Thank you, sir. Madam Clerk, would you call the delegations?
Yes, the first delegation is Hart Jansen, representing Hassan.
Welcome, Mr. Jansen. Council looks forward to your information about Hassan and your views on what we've been presented tonight.
Thank you. Yeah, you can go to the next slide, please.
And Hart, would you pull the microphone
Sure.
over so that you're speaking into it? That'll assist those of us who are a little hearing challenged.
All right, no problem. So I'm not going to go through a climate lecture, but just 90 seconds on context. So we are in a climate crisis. Oakville has recognized this crisis by declaring a climate emergency about 4 years ago. And one key way in which we can fix this crisis is by reducing methane and carbon emissions, by replacing our gas furnaces and water heaters with electric heat pumps. Next slide. So why do we have to keep seeing this slide? Because Canada is among the worst carbon emitters in the world, has about 3 times the emissions of the G20 average, and we have yet to do anything substantial about it, including here in Oakville. So let's also be aware that we now have definitive proof that fossil fuel combustion causes lung cancer, as well as the increased heart attacks, strokes, and other lung disease that we already knew about. So not only do we have a responsibility to use our abundant resources to reduce our carbon emissions, but also a responsibility to our own community to reduce local air pollution that causes lung cancer and other diseases. Next slide. So the exact percentage of emissions for transportation versus buildings varies by municipality according to data quality and assumptions made. The figure here for buildings is from the Oakville Energy Task Force. The Toronto Atmospheric Fund has a recent report that shows natural gas is responsible for 41% of emissions in the GTHA when we include natural gas power plants. We can conclude that emissions caused by natural gas are substantial, and it's essential that we reduce these emissions substantially to meet our municipal and federal emissions reduction goals. And we now know that emissions from methane, aka natural gas, are much higher than was previously thought. Next slide. So CO2 is the gas that is responsible for most of the climate change effects, but recent US government estimates are that methane is responsible for about 30% of the climate change impact that we've seen. Now, CO2 persists in the atmosphere for 300 to 1,000 years, whereas methane persists for about 10 to 20 years. Methane is 90 times as potent as CO2. So the net here is that we've got a crisis, but we've got a really good opportunity to reduce the effects of climate change quickly if we can reduce the amount of methane that we release into the atmosphere. Next slide, please. So here's the emissions picture for natural gas use. So natural gas, again, is 95% methane. When the gas is extracted and processed, there are significant leaks, especially with the new fracked wells, which are 80% of the new wells in Canada. There are also leaks when the methane is collected and processed before being pumped into the pipeline. There are also leaks in the distribution system. When the natural gas is burned in your furnace and water heater, the methane is converted mainly into CO2 and water. But whenever you burn that natural gas in your home, you're also causing all those upstream emissions from the extraction, processing, and distribution. Next slide, please. So don't let the word natural fool you. We are extracting, distributing, and burning methane. And most of it comes from fracked wells, which are the most destructive environmentally, with the highest leakage of methane from extraction and processing. So the basic fact is that the average home emits 5 tons of carbon from burning the methane to heat your air and water. And that estimate is from the Environment Commissioner of Ontario, quoting a 2019 report from Enbridge. Next slide. Now, natural gas is cleaner burning than coal when it comes to an air pollution perspective, so less sulfur dioxide and nitrous oxides in large particles, but it's just as bad or worse from a carbon emissions viewpoint. And that is what we are dealing with here. We're in a climate crisis. We need to reduce emissions. So, you know, comparing natural gas to coal, that's not what it's about. How do we most effectively reduce emissions? And recent articles in Nature and National Geographic Science have synthesized more accurate recent data where they more properly account for methane's effect over 20 years rather than 100 years, as has been done previously. And you will, of course, see that the gas extraction and distribution industries, and to a large degree government, are quoting the older data because it's to their apparent advantage from an image point of view. So natural gas creates as many carbon emissions as coal or more. There is no such thing as clean natural gas. That's a myth propagated by the gas industry and gas distributors, the same way that false claim of clean diesel was propagated for years before it was disproven. Next slide, please. So, bottom line, reduction in methane emissions is the most effective way to combat the climate crisis over the next 10 to 20 years. The good news is we have control over the type of fuel we use and the type of appliances we use in our home. As an example, I've been able to reduce the carbon emissions from my air and water heating by 90% by using a heat pump, an electric water heater, and an induction stove. I have no gas line to my house. Climate scientists agree, based on the interpretation of the recent data, that the most effective means for society to reduce carbon emissions in the short to medium term is by reducing methane emissions. And there are many jurisdictions who have come to that conclusion and are implementing, aggressively implementing legislation, such as our neighbor to the south, New York State. So we have the knowledge, we have the tools. Now all we need is the political will and, as has been mentioned, the education and encouragement of the public. Next slide. So if we eliminate the burning of the natural gas in our homes, then we eliminate the carbon emissions, but more importantly, next slide, we eliminate all the upstream methane emissions. And if you can't eliminate the natural gas entirely, then reduce it as much as possible. Every ton counts. And the feasibility study for home retrofits didn't include these upstream emissions in its business case. I suggest it's up to you to ensure that the priorities of the retrofit program capture this aspect of reality. Emissions at the residence means 1.9 times more emissions upstream that are impacting the global climate crisis. Next slide. So what I suggest is that we need the branding and marketing of what I've my acronym is Home Energy Retrofit Implementing Entity, or HURRY, sorry, to emphasize emission reduction. There are other objectives, but I believe that to achieve success, we need to have that mindset that focuses on emission reduction. Presenters mentioned that we've got to seek out incentives and subsidies, and so we should. But to achieve the emission goals, instead of 38% by 2050, as was outlined in the feasibility study, we need to be shooting for 90% by 2050. I think one of the ways the town could help kickstart this program is to consider financial incentives to early adopters to pay the small delta that will tip the scale to a heat pump rather than a new gas furnace. Next slide, please. So we have some homework to do. Again, I think we need a reporting mechanism that's interconnected with a public education campaign, and I'm delighted to see that the public education was a key priority. And I'll just go right to the last bullet. I think council needs to assume accountability for community climate actions until the FEO is funded and functional. And I will leave it there. I hope I can answer a question about how nonprofits, volunteers in the community can be part of energy coaching in Oakville. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Jansen. Councillor Giddings?
Mr. Hanson, how do you think small nonprofits could fit into the public education?
So there's actually, I recently became aware of a nonprofit program that exists in the New England states that educates and equips heat pump coaches in the community to help their neighbors get informed and make some basic decisions about home energy. And in this, you know, as their name implies, they're focused mainly on heat pumps. Their basic mechanism is, it's a nonprofit corporation where they charge money to train these heat pump coaches to be, you know, reasonably well informed. And in many cases, municipalities pay the fee for these coaches to be trained. But in any case, it's basically the heat pump coaches offer their services on a volunteer basis. So I would say it's a low cost and proven to be reasonably scalable approach in providing advice to thousands of homeowners out there who, again, right now, after we did our recent heat pump webinar, lots of people were asking me, well, who do I talk to? You know, what do I do? You know, it's like there's a lot of moving parts. And, you know, I agree with staff that energy coaches are very helpful and I would say necessary in some respect to have a large-scale effort be successful.
Thank you, Mr. Jansen.
Okay.
Councillor Elgar, did you have a question for Mr. Jansen?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mayor Burton. Hart, thank you so much for your presentation, but I guess I'm trying to give something to, if I were doing it, a residents to show them that in fact you can save money if you install a heat pump. So a lot of people have, like we got the statistics of 80% of the 2019 building stock between 1955 and 1997, which is 81,000 homes, is what the study was on. And how many of those homes already have a high efficiency furnace where they're running at 98% efficiency, so they don't need a chimney in their house anymore. They've got two little plastic pipes coming out. So is there anywhere where we can zero in on where I can show there's financial advantage to having a heat pump over that high efficiency, 98% efficient furnace?
There's no short answer to that question. So again, if you're talking about a home that was built in the 90s, I would say, that's a very tough financial case. If you're talking about a home built in the 50s or 60s where the furnace needs replacement, with the existing incentive programs, it's quite easy to show a break even, if not a positive cash flow. So it depends on the age of the house, the size of the house, other retrofit activities that you do in parallel. So it's not A plus B equals C. There's a few calculus equations in there that need to be solved before you get a specific answer.
Hart, that's my concern. We're talking about all these houses, and they say between 1955 and 1997.
Right.
I dare say there isn't too many houses from 1955 that have the original furnace anymore. And you'll notice all the older houses, they've all got plastic pipes now. Nobody's got a chimney in any house back there. So I'm just trying to figure out how we as counselors can try to instill people to upgrade to heat pumps when in fact they've already spent a lot of money on a high efficiency furnace. So it's a tough sell.
Right. So again, if you aren't looking to replace your existing furnace, it's a tough sell. The mitigating factor could be a hybrid heat pump, where you replace your air conditioning system with a hybrid heat pump that then does all of the cooling and most of the heating. That's a much lower cost solution and is, again, with the subsidy programs available, would very likely be cash flow neutral or positive as well.
And you're going right to where I wanted to go. So, Hart, do we really need to do anything? Because the federal government already is throwing money at it for us. Enbridge is throwing 10,000 up to 10,000 for us. Like I'm missing something here. I hope, I know you're into it deeply, and can you help me? If I was out to go to everybody in the ward and say this is what we should do, how do I peddle this to people, saying that the town should get engaged based on the fact the federal government, Enbridge is involved? And how do I do that?
Just as the staff report was suggesting, you leverage those existing programs and provide a lower cost solution with a economy of scale program that again achieves cost reduction. You can get this done more cheaply through the implementing entity than you can through your contractor down the street, because that implementing entity is getting discounts on equipment and with a well-designed approach is achieving cost savings that the contractors can't achieve.
Well, that's where I'm having a tough sell, but I appreciate what you're trying to do. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Elgar. Councillor Haslett-Deal and Councillor O'Meara, and then are we back to you, Councillor Giddings?
I'm happy to wait.
You will wait because you'll be second time, but I'm just trying to find out if your hand's up on purpose. Thank you. Councillor Haslett-Deal.
Thank you, Hart. It's a bit of an unfair question because you didn't have we've all just heard what the proposal is. So, I'm putting you on the spot, and if you don't want to answer, please don't. You've mentioned you like you're highly supportive of the coach component of what they've suggested. You've mentioned that you're supportive of, seeking those subsidies and leveraging those programs. Is there anything else in what you heard that you would call out as risks or concerns other than your appropriate statement, which is we should all be focused on how do we reduce the largest amount of emissions possible?
I guess my two concerns are getting the public educated, and that means not just providing information, but giving them, the bad news and the opportunities, and like telling them, here's where we are. In order to achieve our goals, we have to do X and Y. And it's a tough challenge. Let's not sugarcoat it, but let's be open with the public and try to get them on board with climate action. I think that's, and again, I'm hopeful, but not naive. It's a big challenge. People have other priorities, but it behooves us to do our best. Climate crisis is the climate crisis, and whether we have COVID or high interest rates or whatever, that doesn't make a difference to the physical reality of the increasing disaster that awaits if we don't do something substantial. So that public education is one concern, and the other one is just where is the accountability for this community effort? I mean, again, we were hoping the FEO would be the focal point, but it hasn't achieved that ability yet. So I just think until that happens, there needs to be more ownership at council. So I hope that can happen.
Thank you, Mr. Jansen. Oh, Councillor O'Meara, do you have a question for Mr. Jansen?
I do, yes, Your Worship.
Okay, you're up. And then Councillor McNeice, and then perhaps Councillor Giddings.
Hart, as always, thank you so much for your effort and your enthusiasm into this. My question really has to go with what do we do to get business on side with this, with regards to those who sell heat and air conditioning units? Because I think, I mean, when I got my units 7-8 years ago, there was no mention of heat pumps. There was no conversation. And in fact, they probably were trying to sell you away of that because they've got better business deals by selling theirs. And I mean, shifting the onus away from the consumer trying to navigate their way and find out where those are. How do we get the big businesses that send flyers in our mailbox every day trying to get us to buy new furnaces and air conditioning units? How do we get them on board? Because if they're pushing their clients to do this, it's a lot easier of a sale than a client trying to say, stop trying to sell me these two things. I want a heat pump. And so how do we flip the script and get the salespeople to want to push this and tell consumers why it's better for them, rather than put the onus on the consumer or the homeowners on that?
I'll try to keep it short. I think you get the implementing entity up on its feet. You, in Oakville, I hope we can add some small financial incentive that, again, I suggest would be the best investment that Oakville could ever make to reduce carbon emissions, dollar spent per ton reduced. A small delta to get people interested in heat pumps. And when you've got the first couple thousand of those going, because people are saying, wow, what a great opportunity, then, well, even before the 2,000 are done, you've got the contractors flocking to the implementing entity saying, hey, how can we get on board with this? Because we're missing the business, right? I think that's the short answer. You create that economic opportunity. That's going to motivate those contracting businesses.
Thank you.
Councillor McNeice, and then Councillor Sheik.
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship, thanks, Hart, for all the knowledge you've been sharing for heat pumps. And, I think we really need to sort of catch up with Europe, and it's in widespread use in many other places. I've used it in a place I've had before myself, and it's nice to see your utility bills drop. My question's around, I find with a lot of these high-efficiency furnaces, many of them have been sold on rental contracts because, part of it, I guess, has been done legitimately, but part of it is a homeowner sees an upfront cost that's quite high, and then they enter in these contracts at $200, $300 a month. And, I've even bought a place where you don't know until after you bought it that you've got this contract and this payment, $200, $300. So I wonder if there's, with incentives, is there an opportunity, certainly I don't think we want to be ripping out furnaces that are new or in good quality, but getting people into owning their equipment and getting their rental costs down through these subsidies. It's sort of a half thought, but just putting it out there, and maybe even to staff, like, do we know the percentage of furnaces or furnace equipment that's out on rental contracts versus ownership? Because we can even more get homeowners' costs down if their utility bill goes down, and the cost of equipment is quite a bit less. And with the place I had, I sort of crunched the numbers, and I was paying 2 to 3 times the price of the equipment through a rental contract. And you can, I don't know if homeowners know it, but you can buy out of that in various different ways. So bit of a half thought, but just putting it out there, maybe there's an opportunity with that as well.
I'm going to duck that one and let staff take it.
The councillor will have plenty of opportunity to talk to staff, of course, being a member of council. Thank you, Councillor McNeice, and thank you, Mr. Jansen. We have a question for you from Councillor Shi.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for your presentation for the heat pump. So I have, the first question is, so I heard that there's technical problems, so that the heat pump won't work under 15 degree. Is that right?
So I've had a heat pump for 10 years, and 10 years ago, there weren't any, true cold climate heat pumps available. And so I have electric baseboards as a backup, and I use those electric baseboards about 3 days a year. So I would say that even a technologically outdated heat pump is pretty good for our climate. And I recently read a heat pump article from Winnipeg, my hometown, which is a lot colder than here. And they have had quite a few cold climate heat pump installations that work just fine in Winnipeg. And again, my heat pump, as an example, I have done no maintenance on that heat pump for 10 years. It's working fine. So, I mean, there's many manufacturers. There's, American manufacturers, European manufacturers, Asian manufacturers. So, I mean, they're all going to have various levels of quality, but there are definitely numerous manufacturers out there that have good quality, reliable products that work to -20, at least -20, if not -25.
Okay, thank you. So I see this is very important for the education and awareness program. So otherwise, the residency, they really worry about, it's 15, so that's maybe there's not works. How are we going to do that? So they need additional equipment to do that. That's something is barrier for the people who acquire this idea.
Right.
Yeah. So my second question is on your presentation. I noticed that you propose, so the town will be support 1,000 to 2,000 per unit for the heat pump, right?
Sorry. I suggested a possible financial incentive that would potentially, again, when a resident is making a choice, looking at cost differences, again, currently, this might change in 3-4 years. Cost of heat pumps will almost certainly go down. But if we can tip the scales and save, over the years, 100 tons of carbon with, $1,500, that's the best bargain you'll ever get.
Okay, so my question is, generally speaking, how much the heat pump for the single house, average?
It's like, for a typical house, a new furnace might cost, a high-efficiency furnace might cost $12,000. A cold climate heat pump might cost $16,000. Those are rough numbers. I think that are in the ballpark. But again, depends on the size of house, et cetera.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Shi. Councillor Chisholm?
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Hart, for the presentation. And there's so many moving parts to this whole the presentation where we want to move in the next year and where we're going to go with this. Just a question, when you talk heat pumps, and we're talking retrofitting, but on your own personal build of your house, did you convert, or did you put it right away with your new build? Did you put a heat pump in?
Yeah, my house, so based on passive house standards, I designed it with a heat pump and ventilation system from the word go.
Okay, so what we're saying is an your initial build, you put it right in. My question is, have we or any of the bodies out there talked about our contractors, our developers and so forth, moving forward on new developments and subdivision developments of putting heat pumps in as part of the go forward basis if we want to meet those goals? Have any reference to pressure on the builders and so forth in Ontario and even plus around Canada saying put heat pumps in rather than high efficiency furnaces or regular furnaces? Have we got that information yet?
I'm going to duck that one also, except to say that we have a meeting scheduled with Stephen Crawford, our MPP, to talk about this issue, and that focuses on building code. And again, it's primarily a matter for higher levels of government.
Thank you, Hart. That hits right on my discussion and my concerns is that, at the municipal level, we're very limited what we can do. I understand where we want to go in, but this is a bigger picture with respect to the province and the federal government to move forward. To dovetail in any of those initiatives that are coming forward, I think is absolutely important. Education programs and so forth. If you look at the municipality in its history, I can't see how many times we've got into this type of level of subsidies or so forth with respect to development. It's always been at the provincial and federal governments to move forward on these. So I have challenge and I have concerns on how we do this, but Hart, you're bang right on. I think this is the way we need to go forward in the future. But I think there's so much more work that has to be done because there's so many moving parts on this. I don't think as an entity of the town of Oakville is going to solve the climate crisis. I think we are a participator in this. I'm sorry, my words. But the reality of it is we're part of a bigger scheme of what we need to do. So I just leave it as that. I still have a lot of reservations when we're moving on this report. So thank you very much for your comments and your expertise and your experience on this. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Chisholm. Councillor Giddings, we're back to you if you are still interested. My hand's down. All right, then, Mr. Jansen, thank you very much for your generous time and information. Madam Clerk, would you call the next delegation?
My pleasure, thanks.
The next delegation is Aki Tanaka from Oakville Climate Hub.
Welcome, Ms. Tanaka. Council looks forward to your information.
Mayor Burton and councillors, thank you for allowing me this opportunity to speak to you about the very important topic of retrofitting Oakville residences to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I'm here as a representative of the Oakville Climate Hub, which is affiliated with Al Gore's Climate Reality Project. One of the primary activities of the hub is collecting Oakville-specific environmental data that can be used to judge the results of climate action in Oakville and can also be used to compare our performance with other municipalities in Canada. One of your former staffers, Donna Hales, was very helpful in verifying this year's data. I've been following the progress of the Oakville Community Energy Strategy since the first public meeting in 2019. I've been doing this as a resident. I wasn't on the task force. I've also been following the progress of Future Energy Oakville. I attended the public meeting of FEO in September 2022 when the retrofit feasibility study was presented by Rob Kerr and Peter Garforth. In December of 2022, I arranged for a meeting with the FEO Executive Director. Hart and Ron and I and another number of other climate activists met with the ED to discuss the progress of FEO. At the time, it was evident that FEO had not received enough funding to become effective, and there has been no further communication to us from FEO, and there is no new news on the FEO website, FEO social media, or the town website. The community energy strategy, if implemented, would result in a significant reduction of greenhouse gas emissions from Oakville as a whole. From page 15 of the strategy, quote, "To ensure that this strategy does not sit on a shelf, priority projects are implemented in the short term, and the 2041 goals are achieved over the long term. It is necessary to dedicate resources to oversee, coordinate, and report on overall progress. This resource will be the Implementation Management Office." And that's the end of the quote. And the Implementation Management Office was renamed Future Energy Oakville, or FEO. Thanks to Councillor Longo, yesterday I received a copy of the Home Energy Retrofit Feasibility Study. It's taken me months to get a copy of the study for closer examination, and I had to really speed read, and I don't know how much of it I actually absorbed. But anyway, my 5 questions to Council are: how will Council ensure that the Oakville Community Energy Strategy, not just the retrofit program, be implemented in a timely manner? The 2016 GHG inventory showed that emissions from residences were 26%, but transportation was responsible for 48% of total emissions. I congratulate the town on reducing emissions from its own operations, but that is a very small percentage of the emissions from the community as a whole. So my next question is, will Council ensure that the other strategic directions in the community energy strategy, that is, industrial efficiency, local supply and distribution, and transportation efficiency, are updated with respect to priority projects, timelines, delivery partners, and financing? As is mentioned in the discussion report for this meeting, there have been significant changes in the market and landscape around municipal retrofit programs. This is the same case for the other strategic directions, so updates to the strategy are needed, and I recognize that the next update is due in 2025, and I'm wondering if that shouldn't be looked at to move up that schedule. My third question, how will Council ensure that FEO fulfills its required role in order that the community energy strategy not sit on a shelf? The community energy strategy is a result of 2 years of concentrated effort on the part of the Oakville Energy Task Force, paid consultants, and town staff. If it is decided the FEO will not be the resource to oversee, coordinate, and report on the energy strategy progress, then will Council think about alternatives? My fourth question is about the statements in the feasibility study of July 2022 for home energy retrofit. Will Council challenge the statement on page 17 that says the study reference case will reduce GHG emissions, but it falls short of the study framing goal of 60% less carbon intensive by 2051, which I believe is consistent with the community energy strategy goals. That seems to me to be unacceptable. And lastly, will Council commit to ensuring that the public be kept up to date about the implementation of the community energy strategy? So those are my 5 questions, and I'll continue here with some closing remarks. I remind you now of the results of the latest IPCC study released in March. This statement from the synthesis report of March 2023, quote, "Human-caused climate change is already affecting many weather and climate extremes in every region across the globe. This has led to widespread adverse impacts and related losses and damages to nature and people. Vulnerable communities who have historically contributed the least to current climate change are disproportionately affected. Continued greenhouse gas emissions will lead to increasing global warming, with the best estimate of reaching 1.5 degrees C in the near term, in considered scenarios and modeled pathways." For most of us here, we may or may not suffer the consequences of our inaction in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but our children and grandchildren will. The people of Oakville are counting on Oakville Town Council's leadership in this area. Thank you for all you are doing for Oakville in this time of high inflation, rising cost of living, global war, pressures as a result of provincial legislation, and other problems. Climate action may not seem as pressing as all the other issues that you deal with, but I firmly believe that it is. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Ms. Tanaka, for the time and concern that you used to bring us your remarks. Councillor, are there questions for Ms. Tanaka? Thank you very much. We appreciate your interest. Madam Clerk, the next delegation.
The next delegation is Christine Hitchcock, joining us from the Zoom screen.
Zoom, all right. Now, there's always a bit of a delay here, but her picture is appearing now. Welcome, Ms. Hitchcock. You may be muted, and if you just check that.
Yes, thank you very much.
There, perfect, thank you. We're looking forward to your information.
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity for being able to speak to you today. The theme of what I want to present to you is summarized in my title slide. There's no time to waste. Please, next slide. So in 2019, Oakville, like many other communities, declared a climate emergency. When I look at what we've done since, there's a lot of reports, there's a lot of organizations. Quite frankly, there's some virtue signaling. We also weathered a global pandemic, you might have noticed. Next slide. But physics doesn't care about politics. Since 2019, global emissions have continued. Increasingly, people are noticing that weather is weird. Among other things, I'm learning all kinds of new weather terms. So Vancouver suffered a heat dome that killed 620 people. There are events called atmospheric rivers that concentrate rain in one area. And again, turning to BC, it wiped out a lot of the infrastructure. It's going to take a long time to recover, and it won't be cheap. We're also learning about things like polar vortexes. There are consequences of this. It's hard to get flood insurance, for example. In the latest IPCC report that Aki referred to, this is the last one before the Paris Accord goal of 2030 is reached. And it's really clear that we're in a dire situation. The International Energy Association, which is a creature of the oil and gas industry in many ways, they say that we cannot afford to have any more fossil fuel development if we are to reach our Paris goals. Next slide. So, but climate change isn't a new idea. I've been hearing about it for a long time, but I was working in ecology, so maybe that's there. But the first mention people have found in print was over 100 years ago. There's new evidence that Exxon knew about climate change in 1977 and not only was reading other people's research, but was doing their own research. There's been a concerted effort by companies with financial interests to generate lies, to create disinformation and doubt, and to obscure what's going on. Internationally, the IPCC was formed in 1990. So the international community knew there was an issue with climate change over 30 years ago. One thing people may not realize is that the IPCC is a political body. So there are a large group of well-informed scientists who create the content, and that content then goes through a political process so that every word has been approved by every signatory nation. It actually removes some of the substance that the scientists are trying to convey. So the IPCC is not an extreme document, it's a political document. And things are actually worse than is being portrayed in the IPCC documentation. So we're now on the 6th set of reports from the international community. There's no doubt that we have issues. There is no doubt that our actions are having consequences. Greenhouse gases are emitted by burning fossil fuels, and it is causing chaos, and that chaos is going to continue. Now, let's go back to that Exxon knowing in 1977. Next slide. This is a slide from a figure from a paper published in 2020 in Scientific Reports, which is a journal from Nature, high quality journal. The article asked the question, what would have happened if we had acted earlier? What does it cost us to delay? The axes are when we started to work on mitigation. So going from 1980, which is when Exxon knew, up to 2030, which is not that long from now. And on the side is how much more it is costing us in trillions of 2015 dollars per year to have postponed action. The green line is to hit our Paris Agreement 1.5 degree target. There's the solid green line, which is our best estimate. And that shaded area is, you know, there's some uncertainty. It's a model, maybe it's lower, maybe it's higher. And you can see that we are not in the linear part of this curve. We need to act. We need to have acted yesterday. We need to have acted a decade ago. We have been prevented from acting because some corporations would rather make money than act for the public good. And those consequences are being paid by nations who have not had the opportunity to benefit from the Industrial Revolution, and by people who are children or have not yet been born. Next slide. So I want to look at some of the other costs and benefits. One is child and youth mental health. Hart alluded to the effects on air quality. Organizationally, as a country, as a municipality, if we're independent from fossil fuels and everyone is using electricity, it allows us to make decisions about where that electricity comes from at a centralized scale. We don't have to go to every home and change things. So that's a benefit. And I want to also say that it's an opportunity for community morale. We can do something together that matters, and we can make a difference. Next slide. So I want to also turn to the question about children. This is from a 2023 article in the Journal of Climate Change and Health. It's a report on a survey of 1,000 Canadian youth between 16 and 25. I asked a number of questions. This one is asking about, do you feel this emotion when you think about climate change? And in order of endorsement, children report youth feel afraid, sad, anxious, helpless, powerless, angry, guilty. Down at the bottom, we have optimistic and indifferent. This is affecting our kids. And I want to offer you an anecdote from my 18-year-old daughter, who often talks about how it's just too painful to talk to older people about climate change because younger people can see what's coming. She offered me the analogy of being in a car and you're in the back seat and you're crossing a train track and you can see that there is a train barreling down. But the people in the driver's seat are going to be clear of the train tracks before the train hits you, and you have no control. And why would you talk to people who are completely indifferent to what everyone could see is coming? Next slide. This study also reported on beliefs about the government's response to climate change. And I think it's important to recognize that climate inaction has an impact on our democracy and on trust. So in this case, they framed it as the response of the federal government, but I think it applies to all levels of government. So 64% of the youth responding said government is not doing enough to avoid a climate catastrophe. Government is failing young people across the world. Government is lying to me about the effectiveness of climate actions. Government can't be trusted. Government is betraying me and future generations. Not acting on climate change is hurting our children, and it's going to have consequences down the road when these are the people who are in a position to make decisions about society. Next slide. So how can we accelerate change? One way is to look at the capital costs, which is part of what this home retrofit plan is doing. It's making it easier for me as a homeowner who doesn't know if I'm going to be living in my house 15 years from now when I would break even. If I can pay that on my taxes and the next people who buy my house can continue to pay it, it makes it easier for me to make that choice, even if I don't think I'm going to be here in the long term. A big part of his education. I was part of the event that Hart set up about heat pumps. There were about 90 people who took part, and there was a lot of interest, and it's clear that there is an appetite for this in the Oakville population. One of the gaps that's been addressed is the need for skilled HVAC companies, and perhaps Oakville could play some role in supporting education. I also wonder if there are other professionals who might be brought into this. I'm thinking of home inspectors and real estate agents who are often part of the decision-making process about where people live. If they knew that energy efficiency was part of that calculation, it might have an impact. It might affect house prices, and that might motivate people. And of course, the developers are an interesting group to look at as well. And I think we need to create motivation and excitement about this. Next slide. So Oakville is a town to be proud of. We're proud of being livable Oakville. We have a strong fiscal situation. There's a lot of community activism to support climate change mitigation activities. For example, I'm part of GASP, Grandmothers Acting to Save the Planet. We're over 100 people. We've done an awful lot in a short period of time. We have a lot of energy. Oakville cares about its children and its future. When I moved here 11 years ago, that's what people told me. They live in Oakville because they care about their children and they want them to live in a community that supports their children. Let's build on that. Next slide. So as for the homeowners program, let's get on with it. Let's not delay. And let's also look at other opportunities. For example, rental housing. These innovations aren't going to apply to people in rental housing. Climate change response is an opportunity to build on Oakville's pride and to unite us as a community in a common effort. We owe it to our children, and there is no time to waste. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hitchcock. You've elicited questions from Councillor Lischina and Councillor Elgar. Councillor Lischina?
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Ms. Hitchcock, for your presentation. You indicated you're a PhD in ecology, is that correct? Or,
well, something like 30 years ago, I got a PhD in animal behavior and learning. And since then, I've worked in forest ecology, mathematical modeling, environment. I've done 15 years in health research. I'm a data geek.
That's great, because I'm hoping you can help me with this one. So first of all, I guess I want to preface this that I have a heat pump, I drive hybrids, I turn off the lights, I hardly use air conditioning in the summertime and all the rest of it. But this is what we constantly come back to is I'm looking at the Canada.ca website, And it says Canada accounted for approximately 1.6% of global GHG emissions in 2018, according to Climate Watch 2021. In your expertise in ecology, and you just mentioned forests, based on that, Canada also is one of the largest canopies in the world with respect to our forests. So my question to you is the floor effect, which means how low can you go to make anything else change? The 1.6% based of GHGs from Canada, how is the floor effect in this situation?
Well, thank you for the question. And it's often asked, you know, we're a small country, we have such a small contribution. Why should we cut ourselves off at the knees and suffer the consequences in the interest of something we're not going to have any impact on? I haven't done the math, but I'm not sure what percentage of the world population lives in Canada. So I don't know how that GHG emissions share of the global total corresponds to our representation in the world. I think we hit above our weight when it comes to climate damage. I think also that we need to consider the fact that we're one of a small group of fossil fuel producing countries. And those calculations do not include the consequences of burning fossil fuels somewhere other than Canada. So we have a lot of different contributions. And plus, any one thing we do is not going to have a big impact, but we all need to do what we can. And we can't afford to sit around finger pointing at one another about how if China and India just did it, we wouldn't have to do anything. And they're saying, well, why should we do anything? We haven't benefited from industry. Like, we could spend a lot of time having these kind of discussions. I don't find them helpful. I really don't. I'm happy to talk with you further about it. Among other things, I'm an En-ROAD climate ambassador. So in 2019, I educated myself on how to use a real-time climate simulator to look at the impacts of different climate options. And I'd be happy, more than happy, to run a climate interactive workshop with people if you wanted to explore more about what we can do and why it's important.
The comment you made about, how much do we contribute? Per capita, we do, but that was my question then. Do we not offset it based on our environment as a country where we have 40 million people and I don't know how many square thousands of kilometers of trees, because that's one of the things that you mentioned. So that's where my question came from. Thank you very much.
Okay, so for example, our boreal forest used to be a net sink for CO2. My understanding is that with global warming and the heating of the permafrost and the release of methane, as well as other impacts, the boreal forest is no longer a carbon sink. So it would be nice. We also have an awful lot of Arctic land. The Arctic is warming at 2 to 3 times the rate of the rest of the planet. There's a lot of stuff in the permafrost that's being released. There's a potential for that to have a huge cataclysmic effect. As Canadians, we don't have control over that. It's a global effect. But I don't think we can say we don't have to act because our natural resources are going to take care of it for us.
Thank you, Councillor Chinna. Thank you, Ms. Hitchcock. I believe there's a question for you from Councillor Elgar.
Yeah, thank you. Through Mayor Burton. Christine, thank you for your presentation. Oakville, we are merely a creature of the province. Are you going forward to the province to enact, like changing the building code so that all new houses have to have heat pumps? Like, are you doing anything on that at all?
So I'm doing everything I can see ahead of me that's effective. My first initiative was with the Stop Sprawl campaign, looking at being clear about the consequences of what the province was doing for land use, the importance of being wise about how we use our land, and the long-term consequences of building sprawl.
But are you
So,
talking, are you,
so that is one of the places that I did it. In terms of heat pumps, I'm new to heat pumps. I helped Hart with the January event and I learned a lot. I also have friends who are highly educated, very interested in doing this, and have had a hell of a time getting support from contractors to do what they want done. They don't have the information. They can't find people who know how to do it. And it's not fair for the individual consumer to have to do all of that work. If you want to talk about barriers, yes, there's a money barrier, but there's a huge barrier in the disincentive because it takes so much work to get the information to do it. If we could facilitate, I've heard people talk about a turnkey system, a one-stop shop. If I knew that if I decided to put a heat pump in my house, I could go to one person, they would get me a reliable contractor, I would know upfront what it was going to cost, it would get done in a timely manner, I could talk to other people who had it done. I think it would be much easier for me than if I had to do it from nothing. So, I mean, is your question, am I going to talk to other levels of government? Yes.
no, but you actually nailed it when you said, I think a lot of people would be more interested in getting a heat pump if in fact there was some calculator that showed it would be financially better for them personally. And that's what seems to be missing everywhere. Everybody's dancing around it. And the federal government and the Enbridge, it looks like willing to throw in money, but it doesn't sound like any details have been done to show, in fact, this will be your cost savings over a 5-year period or a 10-year period.
I'll look up the web pages that have some of that information for you.
I would appreciate that.
I did want to speak again to the question about, some people have high energy furnaces and that it may not be cost effective for them, but that's not everybody in Oakville. I don't know what percentage of houses have already invested in that, but there are a lot of people who don't have that level of heating. But what happens when your air conditioner breaks? What happens when you need a new furnace? Where is the information that says it's an option to use a heat pump? It can replace what you've got. It can give you a more comfortable home. And by the way, it will cost you less money to run. See, that there's an opportunity there for somebody who's already, like, even if you never rip out an existing piece of equipment, these things break, they don't last forever. So how can we give people that chance when they're making that choice?
Well, Christy, you just summarized exactly my whole issue with what we're listening to tonight is that's what we need. Exactly what you said is what we need. We need some kind of a information where you can plug it in and see what the difference is and what the cost would be. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councillor, and thank you, Ms. Hitchcock, very much for your presentation and your answers. Madam Clerk, would you please call the next delegation?
The next delegation is Mark Maxwell and Allison Moore from Enbridge Gas, and they're joining us on Zoom.
Okay, there'll be a tiny little delay while the technology flicks in and out. Councillor Giddings has the right idea. Grab a new coffee. Here they are, appearing now. Ms. Moore and Mr. Maxwell, we're pleased to see you joining us. And Mr. Maxwell, thank you. You've both unmuted yourself as far as I can tell, so we may be able to hear you. We look forward to your information.
Excellent. I am going to kick things off here. It's Mark Maxwell with Enbridge Gas. And firstly, introduce myself. I'm the Regional Director for Operations here in what we call GTA West, which looks after delivering safe and reliable gas to the Oakville region, as well as Halton, Mississauga, Brampton, all the way up to Barrie and Collingwood. So my region is looking after that. So the reason I'm first time addressing you here as council, and very great to do that tonight. The reason I'm here is that I'm kind of your first contact for all things Enbridge, and we have multiple groups with Enbridge, but I want you to feel assured that you have that support you need. Allison Moore is joining me. She is with our energy solutions group, who is actively involved in our home efficiency rebate plus program. So she has some skills in that regard. So I will jump right into it here. So if we can go to the next slide, it's been a great discussion to sit in and listen to, lots of great points. So I'll kind of go quickly through some of the high level and hopefully get to some of the points that I think have already been made tonight, but accentuate where we can. So quickly on Enbridge, North America's largest natural gas storage, transmission, distribution. So we're a large company. We've been doing this for almost 175 years. It was our birthday actually last month. So been involved in this area for a long time. Close to 4 million customers in Ontario, 75% of the homes. So, again, we don't take that lightly. We understand with that responsibility and having that customer base, it's a responsibility to look after our customers first. The thing that we kind of are most proud of is that we need to be innovative and we need to be adapting. The world is changing around us, and we're realizing that. We need to look at more things related to conservation. We need to look at transitioning to new forms of energy, renewable natural gases, and advancing clean technology. So that's something that's important to us as we transition to a net zero type emissions. A couple quick highlights of Enbridge. Most people know us quite well. We're close to 4,000 employees in Ontario. We serve over 670 communities, 313 municipalities, including over 20 Indigenous communities. We look at we manage around $29.5 billion in assets, so we got a lot of stake in this game. And we spend quite a bit of time and energy kind of supporting on the communities which we live and work in. Of that is Oakville, and in total we invested close to $5 million in the community with charitable organizations and across Ontario. So we're quite proud of that. So if we go to the next slide, again, when we start talking about climate change and what path can we take to make a difference and to do something that's meaningful, which I think I've heard here is quite important tonight. We have to look at things that actually minimize cost, right? We have to ensure that we understand the consumer's needs. I've heard that quite well stated tonight, that we have to understand that dynamic. And it's variable. It's not a one size fits all, but it's something that we spend a lot of time trying to understand ourselves. And this whole path to success is just something we know we need to do. It's something that has to be done. If you look at kind of the three main areas on this slide is, we talk about building, heating, and cooling in this retrofit program, which is in the middle of the three columns to the right. But, transportation is something we're actively involved with as well, of looking at how we can, electrify or increase use of renewable natural gas or compressed natural gas into transportation of heavy equipment and vehicles. So that's something we're actively involved in. Obviously, the industrial side of things, how things are being produced in that heavy industry, we're also looking at that and trying to work with partners to do what we can to, maybe not eliminate all of the natural gas, but certainly do it in a way that we can demonstrate step changes towards emissions reductions. The one highlight that we've spent a lot of time, and again, I was very impressed by the work the council has been doing in Oakville with the studies and the reports that I had the opportunity to hear earlier tonight. Very impressive. We are also doing those studies as well. We have a pathways report we worked with external experts known as Guidehouse, to look at how we can get to a pathway of diversification of moving forward, so we can get to both meet the 2050 goals. And the study really looked at a diversified pathway of both, natural gas and electricity, so what we call a pipes and wires approach. And also we studied an electrification pathway. and really what it would take from electrical load to get to where we want to go in that electrification. That study had some good news. It looks like it is possible to do it. The diversified pathway is the way we see it being successful. And again, it comes back to the slide of looking at ways we can, start to use newer forms of energy, reduce emissions, and drive to that next level as the electricity and the gas kind of balance out over time. So if we go to the next slide, it's what I would say on this one is really that we are focused on, if we just go to the next slide there, it didn't switch on my side. There we go. A little bit more, a few more details on the real main areas that we're focusing on. And again, the reason I'm pleased to be here tonight is to show you that Enbridge is looking at this on a broad perspective. We are really looking across our business and how we can achieve this net zero greenhouse gas emissions for all of our own operations. But we're also looking at, throwing the scale and the scope and the size of Enbridge and all our expertise towards this to really accelerate Ontario's transition. So the areas that we really kind of look at is conservation is something that we've been looking at for a long time. So between 1995 and 2021, we've been supporting programs and looking at efficiency with Enbridge and other predecessor companies. And we've been able to save 30.9 billion cubic meters of natural gas, which would actually heat 13.5 million homes for a year. And that reduces 57.8 million tons of greenhouse gases just by conservation alone. So again, we feel reducing that emission and driving the conservation is still something that's really important, but obviously it's got to be much, much more than just that. The next piece is related to renewable natural gases. I think that's been something that even's been surprising to us, how quick hydrogen is really coming into the development and technology. People may know we actually have a hydrogen plant in Markham, and we introduce hydrogen into the gas stream there. And if people have interest in that, we could arrange for a tour or more information. Lots of new developments on renewable natural gas, converting landfills and agricultural type facilities into a renewable natural gas that we can inject into the gas stream or actually use it for powering vehicles. And and the next one is around the fleet transport. Clean energy technologies. We've talked a lot about hybrid heating and heat pumps here tonight. I think that's really important, but we're also looking at deep well geothermal type conversions as well. So we have seen entire subdivisions and developments start to go that way. And Enbridge is involved in that as well. So lastly, we talked about the industrial processes, which we're looking at. So I have two more quick slides, and then I'll open up the questions. But the next slide really gets into our collaboration between NRCan and Enbridge Gas. So, if I look at kind of how this came to be, and again, I think one of the things I hear about energy coaches, how can we make this program to a point where we can achieve the implementation that we want? We really felt this could be one window into this conservation and retrofit program. We felt this was a real singular way to get people interested and incentive-based rewards. So we want to increase those incentives. We want to look at increasing results and penetration. We want to simplify the program. If people can't find the answers and get the with single mouse clicks, it's going to be tough. Confusion, we want to decrease that, and the duplication of costs. So again, it brings some harmony to it, and we can also look at delivering processing timely rebates through a single process. So that's really the main goals. And as you can see on the slide, and I'm sure many people have looked at this, we're really talking about things all the way from insulation upgrades, sealing, air sealing to make sure we're efficient in our buildings, windows and doors, heat pumps, and renewable energy systems, solar and such. The grants are up to $10,600, and it'll be administered province-wide. And the thing that's really interesting about this is that we can actually look at homes that are not heated by natural gas. So this is kind of new for us, where we've actually are now advocating not to our customers, but beyond that. So there's also non-owner occupied homes that are heated by gas. So, people that have apartment buildings or people that are renting, perhaps an opportunity to influence their mixed use buildings and residential for residential portions only, and then small multi-unit residential buildings. So again, some uniqueness to that approach. So the last slide here that we can switch to, it really just is a visual of a heat pump. And again, I think we've talked a little bit about heat pumps tonight. The way the system works together to have that offset of when the heat pump can really take the load and minimize the burning of natural gas and work together is really the magic there. And the technology is coming more and more every day, and we're seeing that with the uptake. I would say there's still some room to grow and develop. One area that we are, Enbridge is looking to grow and develop is in the controller, right? So the more the system can work, not only just based on temperature, internal, external, but the more the system can be smart and manage that demand in an efficient way, we also see lots of opportunities and benefits of that. And that was, I think it was referenced earlier with respect to London. We did have a clean home heating initiative where we've done some studies to really try to understand them and maximize the benefit of the heat pump. So that's for the next slide is a Q&A slide, but just in summary, we've been doing this a long time. Our whole home program has been out there for more than 10 years. Our conservation programs have been there for close to 3 decades. We've seen a decline in the uptake of our incentives for new furnaces. So that's been removed from this program. There's no incentive for natural gas appliances. That's eliminated from the program. And we're really focusing on the energy efficiency and reduction. We're supporting the heat pumps and hybrid heating adoption for the first time. And this is something that we're very interested in. We want to diversify our company's offerings beyond just conservation and become more aligned to municipal climate change action priorities like has been evidenced here tonight. And we want to be partners. We're working with many municipalities. This program rolled out in January. We have lots of interest to talk to, like groups like with yourselves, and it's exciting for us. So I'll close there and ask if there's any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Maxwell. And you have a question from Councillor Elgar.
Through Mayor Burton, thank you very much. I really appreciate your presentation. And when you got to the end, where you explained that you must have some kind of a calculator that I can send out to all the people and residents in the ward in Oakville to tell them how they can calculate how much they can save by getting a heat pump versus their natural gas high efficiency furnace. Where would I find that link?
I cannot give you that link, but I know that's something that has been looked at in Enbridge. So I will take that away, Councillor Elgar, and I will get back to you. But it's a model, and every situation is going to be different. But I believe we can absolutely provide something that would be useful.
That would be so helpful to everybody everywhere. I appreciate that. Thanks so much. Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you, Councillor Elgar. It's good to see you happy. And thank you, Mr. Maxwell, for making him happy. Councillor O'Meara.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Thank you, Mr. Maxwell. I'm very intrigued just with regards to, the fact that you're a gas company and your job is to sell your products. But you're also obviously understanding the way that sort of we're all shifting to have, to be carbon neutral and to not do that. So I'm wondering if Enbridge, has a plan or has a vision statement or a mission statement to almost put that sector of your business out of business and transition into renewable energy or these sorts of things. I mean, I guess it's, is there a path there, or is there a strat plan or something where you're going to almost look to put that portion of your business out of business and transition? I know some other gas companies are looking at that. Shell is one of them. Say we're going to go into sustainable energy entirely eventually, and we're going to get out of this. But what's Enbridge's take on that, or what's your higher level planning say to your destination of where you want to be?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's a great one, and we in our strategic planning within Enbridge as a whole, like we are a large company. I actually just spent the last 10 years in our Alberta operations, and we are going to evolve, right? I think the statement is evolve or perish, and we're realizing we have to adapt. If you look at our footprint in offshore wind farms, in solar, in all of those evolving spaces, our investments are significant. So we realize that, actually, I would say a decade ago or just over, we were so oil intensive. And actually the biggest portion of our business was an oil company. And we actually diversified by moving more into natural gas and balanced our company. So we've been making moves over the years, and we will continue to do that as times change and strategies have to be implemented.
No, I appreciate that, and I thank you for those upfront comments. It's hard to say that the best thing for our business is to put ourselves out of business or in that area, but move somewhere else. And I think that being nimble is what everybody's looking for. So thank you very much for that. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Haslett-Teal, and then Councillor McNeice.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I just wanted to explore a little bit. We've heard tonight about the challenges of contractors or individuals having the expertise around heat pumps. And so can you tell us a little bit about what Enbridge is doing to ensure their workforce has that level of expertise around heat pumps?
Sure. I heard that discussion earlier, and I was thinking about the best answer to that. And I'll be honest, I don't have a perfect answer. The thing that I think we've learned as we've moved into the retail space of renting furnaces and installing furnaces, and then we've moved back out of that, is that we need to maintain some, arm's length or objectivity with contractors to ensure there's balance in the marketplace. But the real thought in my process is if we're not able to give people through our program these resources and have it be successful, that's shame on us as well. So I think we have to, and I can take this away and talk to a few other people that are working more with the heat pump companies to see really what we are doing. But I can't say specifically that we have that relationship with like one or two or three, or even if there's an association that we're working with. I know Allison has something to add.
Yeah, I can share that through our work with the Clean Home Heating Initiative in the 4 communities that we are currently operating in, we have benefited from experience and learnings in terms of what best increases capacity for the contractor network. So it is very much a technical sale when it comes to heat pumps, and we have found opportunities to support from a technical and sales standpoint in terms of sizing, installation, commissioning of heat pumps. And so we provided both sales and smart control training to our contractors as well as the manufacturers, and had them also provide technical training to their dealers as well, and how to explain to a homeowner how the system works. What are the benefits? What are the differences? What are the benefits of using the electric air source heat pump in combination with a furnace, and when are they both optimized? Even down to differences in terms of what the homeowner may experience in terms of the heat that they feel based on their ductwork and those kinds of things. So we really have benefited from our experience in delivering the Clean Home Heating Initiative, and are looking to continue to expand on that and roll that out, and have plans through our energy conservation programming to expand on that, and also develop things like a trade ally network and those kinds of pieces to further support the contractor community and build that capacity.
So I want to thank you for jumping in there because that was incredibly informative. And hopefully our staff will take the opportunity to have a detailed discussion, and perhaps she could share a case study on some of those tips and tricks as we explore, because clearly it is a barrier to longer term success to have the skill of the contractor as well as the relationship with those contractors to move it forward. So thank you very much for participating.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor McNeice.
Thank you. Through your worship, I just wanted to follow up a little bit on Councillor Mara's question just on how the business is evolving. It's really interesting to see how these things are happening. And it sounds like you're making investments in cleaner sources of energy. And we saw in one of the delegations that, the natural gas is not as concerning being burnt in your house, but it's sort of that transmission of hydrofracking, which is banned in many places. And the loss of energy throughout the sort of pipeline of it. So I'm just trying to wrap my head around some of these cleaner sources, though. Heat pumps or electrical sources. Is there going to be some tap into the grid or combination with electrical companies, or how does that kind of get to the customer? Is, I guess, my question.
I'm not quite sure. Are you talking about how you went from the fracking wells and how they're concerned with that, and then the electrical piece? I'm sorry, I might be missing.
Yeah, sorry, it's a bit of a convoluted statement, but so some of the, whether it's solar or some of your other investments, to me seem like that energy would be transferred to households and businesses through the grid, or would need to be transferred through the grid as opposed to through natural gas or other means. So is there going to be some sort of combination with the grid, or I'm just trying to wrap my head around how you create those cleaner sources and get it to the household?
Yeah, and that's a great point. And, my initial thoughts, and maybe Allison can help me out with this one too. She's got some thoughts, but it really, when we look at like that Pathways to Net Zero report, like we understand that it'll have to be a balance of, relying on the electrical network and what it can provide, and we feel, and natural gas. And as things change, we obviously will need to rely on both. But we understand that there's limitations today to the way they work together or the capacity of both. So I really don't know if I'm getting to your point, but it is a hand in glove situation for sure for us. That's the way we see it.
And I would say that our team is working really closely in terms of our planning with the ISO and how are we optimizing planning across the province, as well as looking at how we are decarbonizing our fuel. And as Mark noted, our hydrogen blending facility, RNG, all of these types of gaseous fuels that are low, no carbon, to blend that in and move within the province to a net zero future.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks to Councillor for his question, and thank you to Ms. Moore and Mr. Maxwell for the presentation and the thoughtful answers you gave to the range of questions that you received. Madam Clerk, would you call the next delegation, please?
The next delegation is Ron McKee.
Mr. McKee, welcome. Council looks forward to your information.
Thank you very much. Hello. I have been an Oakville resident for 35 years, and I'm a retired environmental engineer who is deeply concerned by the effects of climate change. I would like to provide my understanding of the key elements of previous delegations this evening and what we have heard from Regia and Chris regarding the home energy outfitting program, home energy retrofitting program. More specifically, if we are going to do our part with climate change and be a sustainable community in the future, here is what needs to be done to expedite retrofitting and in other ways to reduce our carbon emissions. First, let's recognize that home retrofitting is being discussed because it is the low-hanging fruit in our search for climate rewards. However, it will address only about a quarter of the carbon emissions from our community. The important remaining emissions are derived from all our vehicles, our industry, and our institutions. And the town corporation, for all its buildings and vehicles, represents a minute 1.5% of our emissions. Secondly, climate change, as indicated by carbon emissions and atmospheric carbon dioxide levels, is increasing, virtually unabated, while we have been discussing and planning, yet implementing virtually no direct measures for the past 4 years. We are just ruing about a changing landscape, lessons learned, unforeseen events, and world economic circumstances. The most important goal established by our community energy strategy, that 50% reduction in emissions by 2041, however, we have no interim benchmarks. Last September, our consultant said he already knows we're not going to make it. And unlike many other progressive municipalities across Canada, we do not have the goal for our community to be net zero by 2050. It's time to make climate action a core value, not just another priority to be juggled, and to give it the necessary staffing and implementation funding. Thirdly, the town's recommended partnering is very commendable. However, if we are going to rely on partners, we need to be very wary of their motives. Greenwashing abounds these days. A gas company is inherently opposed to eliminating its supply of fossil fuel. Window suppliers think their product is as valuable as an air source heat pump. Chris ably pointed out that dealing with the residential market is very challenging indeed. And we have to bear in mind our provincial government is loath to buy electricity from Quebec, or bring in a more energy-efficient building code, or allow us to build more sustainable communities. Lastly, the town's recommendation to educate the public and have a coach is very commendable. I suggest there are 3 fundamental issues: the urgent need to reduce our carbon footprint, our commitment to reach short-term and long-term carbon emission goals, and how we are progressing toward these goals. On the town's brilliant new website, we need clear, I suggest quarterly updates regarding the community energy strategy, namely what we should be doing, what regular milestones we intend to reach, and our estimated current progress along that path. Thank you for this opportunity to express my views.
Thank you very much, Mr. McKee, for your advice. Are there questions for Mr. McKee? Thank you very much, sir. Thanks. All right, Council, do you have further questions for staff? I'll confine it to table, and questions of staff are in order. And on the other hand, we've had a rich diet of answers already. So let's start with the remaining questions. Councillor Giddings, Councillor Haslett-Thiel, Councillor McNeice, and Councillor Elger. Councillor Giddings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, Chris, I appreciated your presentation and had a few questions about it. The report that Ms. Tanaka referenced earlier, I received that yesterday as well, so I haven't had a lot of time to go through that as Aki has. It talked about the current retrofit market as relatively unattractive, and we can see why based on a number of the challenges before us. Hart mentioned the cost of heat pumps about $16,000, I believe. The report talked about ballpark price of $35,000. However, with buy-in from residents and efficiencies, it would drop to $25,000. Are you in a position to comment on pricing at all?
On pricing for air source heat pumps that are
Correct.
Yeah, I bought a cold climate, the first, I would say, first, second, third generation. And in the last 5 years, it probably advanced to sixth generation, as Hart laid out. I paid a $4,500 incremental cost over the standard heating and cooling system. So Hart laid out $16,000. Essentially, I was in that ballpark for a brand new home. That's not a retrofit, that's a brand new home.
And I believe Mr. Jansen's heat pump is about 10 years old, I believe. Is there a new technology, or is it just getting more efficient like everything else in terms of the mechanics of it?
Yeah, it is a old but new and evolving technology, and advanced so fast. They're using new refrigerants. They use technology that varies the speed of the compressors. They, as Enbridge described, very sophisticated in controls, and actually can calculate what would be better to use on real-time pricing in terms of electricity during the electricity rates during the day, or the natural gas rates, or even your propane rate, just like mine. My technology does that.
So your opinion, we're well past the early adapter stage?
The technology is well past its first, second, third generation and getting more mature and more reliable. And the question about value and proposition to the consumer is becoming better understood. One of the things I think many of the presenters were talking about is the price differential between gas and using hybrid heat pumps. And one of the price issues is the carbon pricing. It is not necessarily impactful on natural gas today, but growing and over time will be significant, and that will change the value proposition to the consumer, that air source heat pumps will become more efficient and more cost effective than running your natural gas, even high efficiency systems. But it's going to take time to run through that carbon pricing escalation.
All right, and you mentioned that 5% penetration is considered high in terms of people moving over. And in that report that we received yesterday, it talked about the necessity of reaching 80% of homes by 2041. A bit of a gap there.
Yes.
With what you've heard tonight in terms of the soft launch and what's coming back, think we have a chance for 2041?
I think there'll be a greater contribution if we take action today rather than go through other study processes. We've got current in-market programs that we can leverage, and finance programs that we can leverage. We have not done calculations to see whether we can get to the CES targets. It will be a fairly ambitious target, as Rob pointed out earlier, but we have to start today. And the question is, let's go through, get something on the ground, run with it today, and start thinking about how we can make it better.
Thank you. I appreciate your expertise. And for staff, the soft launch proposal that'll be coming next quarter, will we have talked to contractors at that point? Will we have talked to industry partners in terms of HVAC? Will we, just wondering how quickly if anybody that's watching this evening, how quickly will they be able to go through the process and buy something?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Giddings, in time for Q2, the intended plan was to deliver on some sort of communication and outreach targeted towards homeowners. I think that as a part of the detailed implementation plan that we bring back to Council, we can certainly explore those opportunities to engage with contractors, other stakeholders. And like I mentioned in my presentation, last year we did submit a grant funding application to NRCan for funding in partnership with Burlington and Halton Hills on that contractor training initiative. We haven't heard the results of that funding application yet, but we do anticipate that it will come soon. So pending the results of that application, that can help kick off some of that work as well.
And my last question, you mentioned Halton Hills. There are a number of municipalities that were mentioned in the Garforth report, and you mentioned earlier as well. Are we talking with them? Or is there a group effort in terms of best practices and sharing of information occurring?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, we are a part of a number of community of practice groups and working groups through FCM, as well as the Clean Air Partnership. And even locally within Halton, Burlington, Milton, Oakville, and Halton Hills connect regularly to provide updates on these things. And I actually worked at the town of Halton Hills prior to joining Oakville, where I led the development of the pilot program there. So I regularly connect with the staff there to hear updates.
Good to hear. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Giddings. Councillor Haslett-Deal.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. So I have a few just basic questions to make sure I've got some facts correct, and then some additional. When we talk about the penetration rate, do we know what the penetration rate was in Calgary? Because you referenced that as soon as they announced it, they got a response. So do we know what those numbers are? That might be helpful to understand.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, within, I believe it was 36 hours of their announcement or opening of the program, they received 240 pre-qualification submissions. So that's not a full application. It's kind of like an initial expression of interest, where once you submit that, city staff or the program administrator will kind of review your initial request and then let you know if you can submit a full application. So they did share that of those 240 submissions, the total funding amount requested was about $7 million. And that's as far as they've kind of gotten. They paused the application intake just so that staff could deal with those 240 applications first in a timely manner, and they haven't reopened it yet. So they're still working through those 240 submissions, and they haven't yet determined how many of those 240 will actually move forward and be viable projects versus might not progress further.
So I don't want to go too far in the weeds, but 240 doesn't seem like a high number when you think about penetration of the Calgary residential market. And it seems kind of a little bit off around the 7 million. So did they have an incentive program that wasn't similar to what Garforth was suggesting in the original feasibility study? Do we know anything about what might have driven sort of those costs?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, they didn't have any additional incentives. It was just, it's a loan, loan program through an LIC mechanism. Homeowners can get up to, I believe it's $50,000 at a 2.95% fixed interest rate. As far as I know, there weren't additional incentives. I don't know if, no. And I think
I just, through you, Mr. Mayor, I did just want to add a quick search of Calgary shows that they have over 500,000 homes and 240 applications. Pre-applications, you're looking at well under 0.00%. It speaks to the financial impact that these programs have. You can only get a small number of homes in the grand scheme of things through some of these programs. So well under the 5%.
Okay, thank you for that. Do we know what the other municipalities' penetration rates are? Have they, when you've had these discussions with them, have they shared with you, whether they're on an LIC or not, what their penetration rates are?
yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, I do have that information. I can provide that in a more detailed kind of summary after this meeting if you'd like. Generally speaking, they haven't achieved the desired number of uptake. Part of the reason is that the funding amounts requested are higher than anticipated. So like Calgary whereas they may have been anticipating $50,000 per applicant. Some participants end up requesting a lot more funding, so that limits the total number that can benefit from the program. But if you are interested in seeing the detailed numbers across the municipal programs, I can provide that information.
I just think it is quite relevant about what is the target we're aiming for here. And, if 5%, and I take, Chris, your prior expertise to heart, but people have an increased consciousness about what is happening around the world from a weather perspective and climate change. And so, it's hard for me to believe that 5% is going to be hard to get to. And I'd like to have a data point of what we've learned from those other municipalities. I think that might be beneficial. My other question is, you stated earlier that financing is not a barrier. So is that because you believe that the federal government's grant or loan process, as well as other incentives such as what Enbridge has suggested, takes that financing barrier away? Is that what you're inferring? I just want to be clear.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. The reasoning behind that statement is essentially to say, from some of our lessons learned through other municipal programs, specifically the programs that are offering the Energy Coach service, is generally speaking, they received more interest in participants wanting to access the Energy Coach versus wanting to access or obtain financing through loans. And I think some of Chris's previous discussion on the consumer insights also touches on this, generally in that considering the inflation environment and financial environment today, people who have the capital to do this kind of energy retrofit work can do it. The barrier, again, is the education awareness piece. And for the municipal programs who are offering loans, the majority of them were able to offer zero interest loans to match the federal zero interest loan program at the time that they launched. But that would be unlikely. It's unlikely that Oakville would be able to offer a 0% interest rate, and that would significantly limit uptake. Potential homeowners may not be willing to pay, prime plus 2% versus a 0% loan offer.
So the one conversation and I may have missed it, that I didn't hear was the local improvement tax spreads the cost out over a period of time and takes away that barrier of, I live here, I might only be 5 to 10 years in this house. Why would I put X amount of dollars in to do this if I'm going to flip the house? Whereas the local improvement changes that possible option. So I didn't hear any analysis on that. Is that just because of the reaction from Calgary and the other learning? Can you give me a little bit more insight?
Sorry, do you mean that it's in the homeowner's interest to participate in an LIC-based program because they can sell their home?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm on a local improvement and I'm going to sell my house in 10 years, the new property owner gets a heat pump, gets the advantages of what you've invested in, but you're not carrying that additional cost forward. It's now with that property owner. I just didn't hear is our walk away because of the uptake we think we're going to get?
Right, and what you just described is one of the key benefits of the LIC mechanism is that the individual doesn't carry the debt and it's tied to the property. But to your point, the walk away is ultimately because of the uptake and also just the challenge of a municipality's ability to be able to fund this type of program in the long term. All of the municipal programs that we mentioned earlier, they were able to fund their programs, which are pilots, they're temporary, through a combination of municipal funds and loans through FCM. But once that round of funding is exhausted, they haven't yet addressed how they're going to continue funding this program and being able to expand to more participants once that initial loan amount through FCM runs out.
Okay, thank you for that additional detail. My other question is just further to Councillor Elger's point around the financial model and about being able to show the resident, here's, if you buy this, this is what your emissions reduction is, and here's how your cost savings will be against your utilities. Will that be something that you're working on between now and when you report back?
So that is an ideal situation where we develop an energy essential calculator for consumers to engage through an online type tool. Many utilities actually have done that through their conservation programs, and they could be used or leveraged for these kind of applications, even through the town. So that would be something definitely that would be contemplated in an outreach and education tool.
Okay. And my last question before I get the hook is further to one of the delegates' questions about, I think several of them said, how do we take action now? What would you need from this council to move faster than the chart you showed us, which is, got some progress into Q2 of 2023 and a report at the end of 2023. How could we advance CES reporting and this initiative? What do you need from us?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So this is a joint effort between the town and OEC. The town has resources dedicated to developing this program. We already have discussions underway on a partnership. We still have to work out the details between our two organizations as to who is doing what. But I would suggest that we do have the staff in place to get the program up and running.
Do you have the staff in place to do it faster?
So we are looking at Q2 to finalize we're in the second quarter right now to finalize the partnership arrangement and getting the soft launch of the website up. By Q4, that is our, I would say that was a realistic timeframe to get the full program up and running. We can take it back to see if we can go a little bit quicker, but I think what we've presented is reasonable to allow due diligence. I think adding additional staff to that, going out to market to hire additional staff, I'm not sure how that would actually speed it up, in all honesty, by the time you go through that type of process.
I'd ask that you consider and evaluate that a little further, but thank you for that.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, if I could just add to that, if we can develop an implementation program sooner, we'll bring it to council sooner. So I think that's the approach we take at this point in time. I think we have, as Julie has said, the resources to be able to do it. It's the discussions and the negotiations with partners, those types of things. So if we can bring it forward faster than the time frame we have, we'll certainly work to do that. But we think at this point in time, that's a realistic time for us to be able to do it.
Councillor Hazardale, thank you. Next is Councillor McNeice. Are you up?
Yeah, sorry.
All right, you're next.
My hand down a little too quick. Thank you, Your Worship, through you. I just had a question on the community energy strategy. I believe I heard a delegate, and just sort of glancing at it, I see that our GHG reduction goal is 50% by 2041. And just sort of scanning, what some of the 2050 goals are federally, it's looking at net zero, and a number of communities, including Guelph, Vancouver, Hamilton, Toronto, Halifax, have committed to a 2050 net zero GHG reduction. So I heard one of the delegates say our planned update for the community energy strategy is 2025, and should we be looking at updating that sooner, seeing that there's a pretty big exponential gap between 50% GHG reduction and then 9 years later, essentially 100% reduction. To me, that seems like maybe we should be looking at an update, but over to you for some comments on that.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor McNeese, we do provide a CES implementation update report every year, and we've done that since 2020, just to highlight progress towards completion of the priority projects. And the next update being in 2025. 2025 is the timeline that the plan would be brought forward to council for approval. The work to update it would actually have to begin, I would say, by the end of this year, so that we can ensure that we complete sufficient community and stakeholder engagement, including work with the Oakville Energy Task Force and Future Energy Oakville, and obtaining community input from other environmental groups or community members and stakeholders. So that timeline for the update to start by the end of this year, it would take, it would be a comprehensive work plan to get the plan ready for approval for 2025.
Okay, thank you for that. So maybe my suggestion is sort of piggybacking on Councillor Haslett-Thiel, can we sort of do more sooner? I understand the lead up to it. So, if we're sort of implementing more, can we also look at planning for more in some of these, it seems like the consensus through the Paris Accord and through the UN is net zero by 2050. So that seems to me like the goal or the higher up goal we got to shoot for. So that would be my suggestion. And then just a question on the local improvement charge. So my understanding from the province, how that's implemented is usually more municipal capital projects. Like, are we certain that it can be used at the household level? Because I'm not sort of seeing it on any, website government documents, but just had that question.
Yes, so one of the, I think it was a Municipal Act amendment, the City of Toronto first used it for home energy improvements. So the Municipal Act does allow for the use of local improvement charges to fund or finance home energy improvements. And we've seen from the municipal programs that are in place, they are using it and are able to without any regulatory limitations.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McNeese. Councillor Elgar and Councillor Lischina.
Thank you, Mayor Burton, through you. My question is to staff. I just have a question. I'd like to have an explanation as to why this report that was dated July the 28th, 2022 from Garforth International was not available to members of council until yesterday because there was a lot of information there and it's very detailed. And we have been asked, Councillor Longo and I have been asked for a number of months from Ms. Tanaki for this report, and we were only able to, and Councillor Longo forwarded it to her as of Monday. And was there a problem for us to see the report? Because it is extremely detailed, and I still haven't seen the appendices A through K. I wonder if maybe staff can explain why this happened, or how to make sure it doesn't happen again, because I do read detailed reports. It may be boring to most, but I do read them, and I wasn't able to.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor Elgar, and to the rest of council, I will take responsibility for that decision. This was a technical report. We don't typically post those publicly, which is separate to sharing with council. It was complex. It was a technical feasibility study versus an achievable potential study. So the decision was made by me that we would keep that to staff review only. I do recognize that many members of council did want to see that report, and I do apologize that you received it late. And not back in September when we referenced it in the community energy strategy. What we will do
going forward, will council members be able to get the reports in a timely manner instead of 8 months later?
Yes. So with this particular report, we will have this, it's quite large. With the appendices, this is not an easy, we can't put it through email. We will put it on the website with all the appendices included so that both you and the public can see it. And in future, when we have feasibility studies of this nature, we will make sure that council does receive a copy in advance of any report.
I thank you so much for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Elgar. And Councillor Lischina.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. So again, as well, didn't have as much time to look at it, but regarding the presentation today, so my question is about the bureaucratic arm of this initiative. So the Community Services Corp. So basically you did case studies for 80% and 50%, but it looks like 5%. What's the break-even point in order, because you were saying that it would actually be cost prohibitive. So what was there a point where you said, is it 20% of homes in order to have this whole extra bureaucratic system set up?
Yeah, that's a great question. We didn't do the sensitivity analysis, percent by percent. We picked 3 percentage penetration marks and just did the analysis. 5% would be a very extremely successful residential program. In the general market, and both Enbridge and most of the utilities that offer conservation programs with incentives, this didn't, would be very happy about a 5% penetration. So anything more of that, would be pretty ambitious. So we didn't test just where the break even would be on the Municipal Services Corporation concept. But I assume that, if that's an undertaking, that could be done. But I'm not sure it would be of value, because it would still be pressing well beyond the 5%. And still answer the question.
I agree with that, yes. And so the whole point of, in order to get 30% residential sector efficiency, you need 80% of homes retrofitted. Even if you did the best case scenario, 5%, that would be like 0.0001%. I mean, it seems like a lot of work for, again, this floor effect. I'm not understanding the cost analysis here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lischina. Councillor Adams.
Thank you very much for all the discussion and presentations and so forth. And I'm going back through the presentation, and I wondered if you could go back to slide, well, let's start with slide, I think it's slide 12 and 13 with the timeline. Can you just describe again what it is and who's going to do the next steps more precisely? And in the partnership discussions, what work would happen with Halton Region and with the other local distribution companies, so that each of the local communities is not replicating the kind of work that we're considering doing locally here? Recognizing that we might have 80,000 homes or something in Oakville, and there's similar numbers in Burlington, maybe a little bit less, but similar in scale, and similar in Milton and Halton Hills together as another chunk. What kind of opportunities are there to not duplicate?
Through the mayor to you, Councillor Adams, as I mentioned, we are kind of in a working group with the Halton area municipalities, and Halton Region has actually just initiated what they're calling a Halton Municipal Climate Working Team, and one of the kind of priorities for that working group is home energy retrofits and a retrofit program. And Burlington and Halton Hills have also shared a similar kind of concern that, individually we're all working towards kind of the same thing, and are there opportunities to coordinate and align wherever possible. I know that in Halton Region's strategic plan, they did reference specifically that there is an intent to explore a coordinated region-wide potential home energy retrofit program. So these are conversations that I think in the kind of post today that we'll continue to have with Halton Region and the other potential partners to ensure that there isn't that duplication. And as far as for the specific action items on the slide, I know Julie also mentioned that we still kind of have to figure out roles and responsibilities between the town and OEC as we progress through the next steps.
So part of what's coming back is who's going to be the roles and responsibilities associated with it. So that is part of the discussion still. Yeah?
Right.
Okay. And so and what comes back will obviously have a financing element to it in terms of who and how the payment would happen to support those things.
Right.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Adams. Councillor Chisholm?
Thank you, Your Worship. On page 28 of the report, it says the study recommendations. Is this what we're looking at tonight for approval from council with respect to the, I don't want to reread all of them, but there's 3 of them. Is that what specifically we're approving tonight? I just need clarification on that.
Councillor Chisholm, the motion tonight is to receive the report and the presentation, and staff will go away and do what they've indicated that they feel they must do to meet our goals.
The only concern, Your Worship, is that the study there's recommendations in here, 3 of them. So are we approving those recommendations as part of the report, or just a receiving? Or I'm a little confused on that part.
We are only receiving a report and a presentation. That's the only motion that we're asking for. In fact, if there's no more questions, would you be good enough to move that?
I'd be happy to, Your Worship.
Could I get a second for that? Councillor McNeice, thank you for that. I sense that our questions are done, and I'd like to put the vote. Is there any objection to the motion? Councillor Lischina.
So for the next step slide,
Can't hear.
sorry. On the next step slide, the soft launch, communications and outreach. Soft launch of what?
So that's referencing the communication and outreach program. So some type of resource for homeowners explaining, home energy retrofits, the benefits, the available incentive programs that we talked about in our presentation through other entities.
So the federal ones, the ones that already exist.
Right.
So we're not creating one at the moment of anything. Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Councillor Haslett-Deal.
So my other, just as a follow-up to Councillor Adams' comments and questions, from a regional perspective then, will you be reporting back as part of the next report what the regions would be prepared to do to move this forward? Because I think there's the subtle questions that are around is, so how do we reduce the duplication of effort? How do we get the engine moving faster? And what control do we have to make that happen? So is that something that you can commit to including in the report back?
I understand your question perfectly. I would suggest it's not really a question for town staff. That's a regional question. You and I and the other members of this council who are members of the regional council have an opportunity coming up very soon to approve whether or not the region will be doing that. And I hosted a meeting of the 4 mayors of Halton yesterday, and we agreed that we were going to be encouraging our fellow members to be supporting consolidation upward to avoid duplication. But it's a decision for the region to make, and then for the local municipalities to say thank you, I think.
So I'm glad I asked the question, so that information came out, and I would encourage you, in any influence you have, to also make it clear that we'd be there to support them if, in fact, we can get it approved at the region. So thank you, Mayor Burton.
Well, the indications are that there might be a unanimous vote for that, so I can always be surprised, and my father, the meteorologist, likes to say never make a forecast unless you have to, so Dad, I'm sorry I broke your rule. But I think that's what's going to happen. Is there any objection to the motion? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, that carries. And I now would ask for a mover and seconder for consideration and reading of the confirmatory bylaw. Councillor Grant and Councillor Shi, thank you very much. Any objection? There being none, the confirmatory bylaw is read, considered, and passed, and that ends our meeting. Thank you very much for all the time and effort that you put into this, and good night. The meeting is done.